Coming to you from the basement of the old 1st Division Barracks in the heart of the United States Military Academy at West Point. This is Character Cut, a podcast that brings together civilian expertise with Army officership to examine a virtue and how we can help develop it in those we lead.
Hello and welcome to On Point. This episode features a conversation between Major Benjamin Elliott, instructor for MX400 officership at the Simon Center for the Professional Military Ethic at the United States Military Academy at West Point, and Dr. Ryan Erbe, emotional wellness integrator with the Character Integration Advisory Group at the United States Military Academy. Major Benjamin Elliott graduated from the United States Military Academy in 2007 with a BS in psychology. In 2016, he earned an MS in Strategic Intelligence from the National Intelligence University in Washington, D.C. Throughout his military career, Major Elliott has served as a military intelligence officer and as an observer, coach, and trainer on the Cobra Team for the National Training Center. After gaining his MS, he served as an Interagency Fellow and Counterterrorism Analyst at the National Counterterrorism Center, Office of the Director of National Intelligence. Dr. Ryan Erbe has a demonstrated history of working in the higher education field and is skilled in research, teaching, course design, curriculum development, nonprofit organizations, and more. He earned his PhD from Indiana University in Health Behavior and Human Development in 2017. His current focus is on integrating character development into wellness initiatives across the military academy. In this episode of On Point and the West Point Association of Graduates Character Cut series, Dr. Erbe and Major Elliott talk about making people a priority in the military. They discuss the virtues of love, competence, character, and caring, and whether unconditional love has a place in the Army, leadership, and service. Major Benjamin Elliott and Dr. Erbe also go into the 5 forms of love and the ways it impacts life in the military. Now, please enjoy this interview between Major Benjamin Elliott and Dr. Ryan Erbe.
Welcome to the next installment of our Character Cut podcast. So we're here broadcasting from the heart of the United States Military Academy at West Point. We're in the central area of the Academy in the depths of 1st Division Barracks, which is home to both the Character Integration Advisory Group as well as the Simon Center for Professional Military Ethic. My name is Ben Elliott, and I work in the Simon Center as an MX400 instructor. I'm pleased to be speaking today with Dr. Ryan Erbe, our resident integrator in the Center for Enhanced Performance. Welcome, Ryan. How are you doing?
Good. Yeah, good. Great to be here with you today, Ben. Looking forward to this.
A lot of what we do with this Character Cut podcast is we connect streams of character and virtue, and we emphasize that they're not only a requirement, but also a necessity to serve in our Army. So here we're trying to connect both our theoretical elements of this character and virtue exploration with the practitioner. So today, myself as a 15-year veteran of the Army and Dr. Ryan Erbe as a study and practitioner of character and virtue. So Ryan, love to have you on here and look forward to having our conversation. If you just introduce yourself to the group and the team out there today.
Thanks again, Ben. Grateful to be here together talking through this. So, my name is Dr. Ryan Erbe. As Ben mentioned, I'm one of the character integrators over here at West Point. I'm part of what's known as the Character Integration Advisory Group. And we focus on character development across the academy and bringing different facets of West Point and their character development together. And so as Ben mentioned, I'm situated in the Center for Enhanced Performance, where I do my integrative work. I also teach over here. I conduct research here at the academy. So a little bit about what I do there, but very excited to talk today about the virtue of love. Which may be surprising to some that we would be talking about this as a virtue. I think oftentimes we think of love as just an emotion, and there's certainly an emotional component to that, or we may think of certain types of love, like romantic love, but there's lots of different types of love. And we can think of love specifically as a virtue, as an important virtue in my mind. And the way that we're going to define love today is by using a Greek term. This is a Greek term that refers to a kind of love that is an unconditional love, a selfless love, and a sacrificial love. And the definition that we'll use actually comes from a recent book that came out by Dr. Eric J. Silverman. He wrote a book called The Supremacy of Love. So he talks about love, situates it in what's known as neo-Aristotelian virtue ethics. And this is the definition that he gives us for love. So he talks about love as an action, specifically acts of the will that consists of desires for the ongoing good of people. And so another way to think about that is when the virtue of love is enacted or demonstrated, it's primarily concerned with the good or well-being of another person. And again, as I mentioned before, it involves sacrifice, it involves a sense of selflessness and an unconditional type of love. So that's how we are going to talk about love today and how we're going to define it. But my question back to Ben is, does that kind of love have a place in the Army? And if so, what should our approach be in an Army context to love?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, Ryan. I'm glad, we're talking about it, right? Because you bring up some good points, right? Like, is this soft? Is this unusual to talk about in the military context? I think there's some applicability. So as we explore it, thinking back specifically to what is our kind of guiding strategy? And so if we look at Chief of Staff of the Army, General McConville's guiding strategy right now, it's people first. And some ideas about that as we win through our people, right? People want to be on winning teams. People want to have purpose in their life. That's why people must be our priority. And so thinking even to that as the framework that we examine this from an Army perspective, we have guiding policy, guiding remarks on this. General McConville said back in 2019 when he introduced this at the AUSA conference, it's not about being soft, but rather it's about an idea of caring. And I think as we unpack this a little bit more today, we're going to get into that idea of caring. There's plenty of places we can look for how this applies. One that just struck me when I was looking into this idea is even adopting an idea from our sister service. So the Marine Corps, Colonel B.P. McCoy quoted the following, and I think it just summarizes so well what we do in our profession. So a commander must genuinely love his men and win their affections in return. The passion of a commander is equal parts love, zeal, and a quiet wrath. Love for the men or women, zeal for the lifelong study of the profession of arms and the behavior of men and women in battle, and the quiet wrath to make the nightmares of our enemies come true. That one just kind of gives me chills when I think about it, that, as a profession, as members of our profession, we have this equal part love, zeal, and passion. Thinking back a few years ago, thinking about General Eric Shinseki, a former Chief of Staff of the Army, said it in his retirement speech in 2003. He said, "You must love those you lead before you can be an effective leader. You can certainly command without the sense of commitment, but you cannot lead without it. And without leadership, command is a hollow experience." I think there's so much more to that, right? This idea that if we have no love and care for our subordinates and those that we lead, it's going to end up being a hollow experience. I think there's probably more, Ryan, in the literature that would suggest that maybe even from an organizational leadership perspective, that there's an importance to love. Kind of turning back over to you, is there more there that we can unpack?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just interesting to hear you share those quotes from these pretty prominent military leaders and their perspective on care, their perspective on love, and how it plays out and how important it is in a military context. And so the research suggests the same thing, even in a military context. And so one study that I'll point to, which I think is really fascinating, connects so well with what we're talking about here, this idea of love and caring, comes from Dr. Patrick Sweeney. And so he's a social psychologist for the Army. And back in the early 2000s, he was slated to teach at West Point. And so he's in the process of completing his doctoral work. But he was asked by General David Petraeus to go over to Iraq in the midst of combat and do some research over there and figure out what promotes trust specifically for a leader. And so Sweeney's over there, he's conducting his research, and he found some really interesting traits or characteristics of a leader that help to promote trust within their units, within their soldiers. And so he calls these 3 traits or these 3 characteristics the 3 C's. So just to make it easier for everybody. The 3 C's are competence is number 1. So a leader needs to know their job and be able to do their job effectively. When soldiers see that and recognize that in their leader, then it helps promote trust, which makes sense. I think that's pretty intuitively obvious, but interesting that this came out in the research. The second thing that he found, or the second C, is character. And character in a military context can be thought of as embodying or demonstrating the 7 Army values. And so values are things that we hold or deem important to us, but when enacted upon, certain values can become virtues. And so the Army holds up these virtues of loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage. When a leader is embodying those things and living those things out, it helps promote trust among their followers. But this third C is, I think, related to character and very much connected to the things that we've been talking about already, especially as it relates to love. And as Ben was talking just a minute ago about caring for soldiers. And so that's the third C. And so when soldiers believe that their leader has a clear and heartfelt commitment to doing the right thing for their soldiers, to willing the good in their lives, to be primarily concerned about their well-being, especially in the midst of very trying and difficult circumstances, that as well promotes trust or enhances trust for a leader. And I think what's interesting, especially with that research, was that Dr. Sweeney's results found that when a leader was demonstrating those things, that boosted trust and led to morale being higher, and soldiers were willing to give their all for their leader and for their mission and for their units. And so some really relevant research there related to how important caring or this virtue of love is in a military context. And I think the next question would be, well, what enhances love? So for a leader, or anyone for that matter, what might promote love for other people? And so there's a growing body of research that points to mindfulness or mental training practices that allow this or enable this to happen. Specifically, what this looks like would be a person, and I should say that this research has not been done, to my knowledge, in a military context yet, but we'll get to that in a second. But when a person sits and imagines other people in their lives, envisioning their well-being, being promoted and enhanced, that actually enables them to not just have feelings of love towards other people, but actually enact those loving characteristics or loving actions towards other people. So again, that research has been done in non-military contexts, but I'm curious about your perspective, Ben, in regards to what that might look like in a military context.
Yeah, I think you might be surprised that part of it is intuitive to what we already do, or intentionality of being a leader. Just relating back to Colonel Sweeney, as a firstie myself, graduated in 2007 from the United States Military Academy, I took a course called Leadership in Combat, and Colonel Sweeney was my instructor. So having experienced his personality and what he brought to the perspective, it was just great, because those 3 C's, they're not only enduring in his research, but the idea that those are the things that we use to certify trusted Army professionals now: character, competence, and commitment. So much so that you could relate the idea of caring to our commitment to our soldiers, our commitment to our community, our commitment to our vocation and our calling here. But I just had to relay back an experience and think of the good that Colonel Sweeney brought to not only myself, but a number of us that were going through his course. But, thinking on this idea of how do we do this in practice, right? So if we think back to, again, let's go to doctrine, right? That's a source of kind of some of our guiding principles and our inspiration. So ADP 622, really known as our leadership Bible, it talks in a paragraph there about how we connect at a personal level with our subordinates, and we anticipate and understand individual circumstances. This not only allows us to take an interest in them as individuals, but it shows that we care about them as subordinates. And leading up to this, it says that this is our solemn responsibility as leaders in the Army, is that we need to develop and maintain open lines of communication, not only so that we can share information with one another about what we're going through, what the challenges are in life, what our desires are for our future, what's our 5-year plan, where do we want to go after this assignment. And it allows leaders to have that genuine kind of care and concern about those they work with on a daily basis. A lot of the times we can get stuck into this mentality of let's lead through information, let's lead through PowerPoint, let's lead through email. But at the end of the day, what this comes down to is that face-to-face level leadership. And I think we've all probably seen or experienced those leaders in our lives where when they come to you and have a genuine conversation with you about what's going on in your life, Colonel Sweeney and others were talking about, is that virtue opening up and you're starting to become more close to the better version of who you are meant to be. One other place that I've gone for kind of a source of inspiration on this subject is our own Dr. Pete Kilner here in the Simon Center, the chair for character education. And one of the things he wrote back in an AUSA post a few years back is that as leaders, we have a moral obligation to genuinely love the soldiers in ways that are appropriate for senior subordinate relationships. And I think that goes back to where we started at the beginning. They're like, is this a soft concept? Is this something that we should be talking about in an Army perspective? I think it really does come to that role and responsibility of the appropriate senior subordinate relationship loving. And so how do we unpack that, right? And Dr. Kilner does a good job. He talks about 5 forms of ways that we can love. The first, of course, is this idea of ensuring that we provide our soldiers with first-class training, right? And so first-class training develops in them the responses required to keep themselves safe in battle. This really roots in the competence form that Colonel Sweeney was talking about. So second, kind of this love or admiration for an appreciation of others. So when soldiers are performing at their peak, when they're putting it all on the line and we're doing it together, you have this sense of appreciation and admiration for their duty. So that's a second way we can love. A third is we often think that soldiers are cogs in a machine, or we're tempted to think that way. But when we recognize the humanity of the individual soldier, I know for myself, I've been most satisfied or most admiring of leaders when they appreciate me for who I am, because I think this leads to empathy. And I think there's plenty of evidence and research to suggest that empathetic leaders are less toxic and care more for those that they lead. Another one was this idea of, back to kind of the way I started, is this moral leadership. Essentially, and this was probably one of the most profound to me, is that when soldiers risk their lives and souls, they do it out of this oath of their enlistment, their obligation to that oath. And in that, they willingly become vulnerable to leaders that they've never even met. And so in knowing that, we as leaders are obligated to provide that moral level of leadership. And I think finally, the last one that he suggests is this idea that leaders put themselves at risk to protect their soldiers. And then this really relates back to what Silverman was talking about at the forefront in our theoretical outlook. So that supreme virtue is the one that's kind as opposed to the one that is arrogant, or the one that bears and endures as opposed to the one that's being irritable and selfish. And so when I lack my own self-interest, or when that takes a second seat to thinking of others more and caring for them, I think that's where we get to this kind of supreme virtue of love. So practically, as I said, there's probably more to this that we do just kind of intuitionally. We conduct conversational counseling, like that's what we should be doing, where we routinely check in with the individuals that we rate, but also encouraging them to do that with those individuals that they rate and checking in as they do that. Others is kind of getting back to this idea of putting positive thought towards individuals that we lead. One of those is just keeping a log of the soldiers in my unit, knowing what the challenges are that they're going through, noting them. Those could be physical, they could be emotional, they could be relational, and reflecting on those kind of in a routine fashion, such that when I see those individuals, I'm able to connect with them on a personal level. Like, to me, the biggest thing about that is just being intentional with our people, intentional with the care that we're applying as leaders. And I think that results in these 5 forms of love that Kilner was talking about, but also our 3 C's that Sweeney was talking about, and gets us to the form of having this more divine sense of love. I think, Ryan, one of the things that stuck out to me, if we can summarize this all in one quote, comes back to one of the heroes of our profession, General Maxwell Taylor. He said that the badge of rank that an officer wears on his coat is really a symbol of servitude to his or her men and women. Thinking of agape, this is subordinating ourselves and serving those that we lead. So with that, anything else standing out in your mind as we close our session on where love is taking us as leaders in the military?
Nothing substantial other than it just amazes me the way that this all comes together, this sort of theoretical perspective, what we see in research and some of the application, but then also how it's been talked about in the Army and practiced in the Army for sounds like a long time. And I just am grateful for this opportunity to connect with you, Ben, and bring these things together. And I think really the hopes being that we can be more loving people, as we serve our country, serve those around us, and hope it's beneficial in that way, especially in the Army for leaders and their subordinates.
Yeah, I mean, that comes right back to the heart of why we're doing this, right? It's not only a requirement, but it's a necessity for our profession. So I applaud you and thank you for the work you put into this and thinking through how can we connect this in the ways that will best suit leaders of character in the future generation. And with that, there's going to be many more of these character cuts coming soon to your podcast streams shortly. And we thank you for tuning in to this one. With that, have a great one. Thanks, Ryan, for your time today. And we'll be on the lookout for more of these in the future.
Got it. Thanks, Ben. Take care.
On Point and Character Cut is a production of the WPAOG Broadcast Network. Please take a moment to rate and review the show and join us each week for a new episode. Thank you for listening.